Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamsham Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Ancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna everyone.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Is Pyariman Prabhu on the call as well?
Not right now.
Doesn't sound like, okay. Anyway, thank him. I thank him for the opportunity. To speak on these verses. So text 22 through 27, as you can see, only 26 and 27 have purport. So maybe we can focus on that a bit more. So the translation again is all the sons of Dhritarashtra along with their allied kings and Bhishma, Drona, Karna and our chief soldiers also are rushing into your fearful mouths. And some I see trapped with heads smashed between your teeth. So there's at least 3 references to the teeth of the universal form, right? Between 22 to 27. Terrible teeth, awful teeth, smashed between your teeth. Sounds scary. Sounds like, what our dentist would tell us when we go for dental appointments. But Arjuna is expressing wonder and the combination of, I should say, wonder and fear, looking at the universal form. Can someone say if the universal form, is it material or spiritual?
I would guess that it's both because it would be all encompassing. The universal form I feel would be everything.
Okay. Who was that? Is that Mother Jiva?
My name is Billy.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you for speaking up. Okay.
Hare
Anyone
Krishna.
else? Is the universal form material or spiritual?
Spiritual.
Okay. And why do you say that?
It's Krishna's form, so.
Okay, simple reason, right?
Yep.
Anyone else?
So Prabhu, anything what Krishna does is spiritual. His Janma Karma Chame Divyam. So his birth and his karma, everything is kind of a Divyam. It's transcendental. Nothing is material in nature for him.
Right. Has anyone seen any references in Srila Prabhupada's books that seem to indicate that it's material?
No.
How would you define material?
So It's interesting. So in one of the verses in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is, this is third canto, chapter 6. There's a there's a there's a reference in several places, apparently in third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Prabhupada says the Virat Rupa is a material manifestation. So how do we understand that?
Yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Well, I know that it's described that Krishna it's his potency. The material world is part of his many and limitless potencies. So from my perspective, the universal form would be the totality of everything. This is just what I feel. It could be wrong. But if Krishna has jurisdiction over everything and all of the energy is borrowed from him, my thought would be that everything would be him, even the things that aren't the nicest. We might not want to look at the tough things or the horrible things, but I just feel like it could be possibly everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does seem to encompass everything, right? Based on the descriptions we hear in these texts here. But what does it mean when we say it's a material manifestation? So it seems like a distinction is being drawn between the Virat Rupa and, say, other forms of Krishna that are in the Vaikuntha planets, right? Form of Krishna himself or Lord Rama, Lord Narayana, and many other forms. We know that they are all transcendental. We don't hear or see any purports in Srila Prabhupada's books that say that those are material, right? But the Virat Rupa does get mentioned as a material manifestation, so it's interesting. So how do we understand that? Now, we know that Krishna has his internal potency, which is known as the Yoga Maya, and then he has the external energy, which is also known as Mahamaya, right? So Mahamaya is an expansion, is a partial expansion of Yoga Maya, right? The Virat Rupa form is a form that is a manifestation of this material energy, Mahamaya. So in one sense, it's material because it is temporary. But in another sense, it's spiritual because it's actually an expansion of Krishna, right? So this is one of those cases where it's both explanations are appropriate. So it's material in the sense that it is temporary, not material in the sense that it's like our body, in which is limited and has other issues. The Virat Rupa is material in the sense that it's temporary. Does that make sense? So Srila Prabhupada, in one of the purports in Srimad Bhagavatam 3.6.4, he says actually both he says this for both Virat Rupa and the Archa Vigraha, the deity form of the Lord. He says, in spite of their material touch, such forms of the Lord as the Virat and Archa are all non-different from his eternal form as Lord Krishna. Right? So the Virat Rupa, although a temporary manifestation, not one of the Lord's eternal forms in the spiritual sky. So that's where the distinction comes in. So it cannot be understood as material, but it can be considered as manifested from Lord's internal potency through the partial expansion of the material energy, right? And so is temporary, and it's a form exhibited for conditioned souls. So it's a temporary form exhibited for conditioned souls. It's not something, it's not the same as the eternal forms of the Lord. So it's important to understand the distinction.
Can I ask a question, Prabhu?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if I apply the same logic, then every form of Krishna in a way is temporary in this material world. If you look at his pastimes of Krishna, I think from material calculations he stayed for 125 years, and then he was not there. So in a grand scheme of thing, it was temporary. Like 125 years is nothing.
That's a good point, but the distinction is the Virat Rupa is not. So while for the other forms that you're referring to, while they are manifested temporarily in the material world, they are eternally existing in the spiritual realm. That's not the case for Virat Rupa. Does that make sense?
I humbly beg to differ. If it's Krishna's form, how it's not? It might not be visible eternally to everyone in spiritual world, the Virat Rupa especially. No, but I it's difficult for me to understand. It doesn't exist eternally in spiritual world.
But
Sorry.
Nanda Gopal, I remember when during Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance day, Ashtamangal Prabhu Alanath Prabhu gave a lecture where he said that the incarnations of Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, happen in these yuga cycles time after time after time. But I would like to ask the Prabhuji who's giving the lecture, does the Virat Rupa happen just like that yuga cycle after, in that same sequence?
In which sequence? Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
So
Like
in
the
the
other
lecture that in the cycles, there are this Satya Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga.
Right.
That in these Yuga cycles, just after Dwapara, just before Kali Yuga, Krishna's avatar happens in every Yuga, that the Mahayuga cycles, So they appear in the same form.
Right.
Time after time after time, But does the Virat Rupa, is this episode of the Mahabharata and the Pandavas, all that might not happen, I don't know, in the 4 Yuga cycles, I don't know that.
That's a good question, but first let me
Yeah, I think it's a separate question. So
it's a separate question. Let me go back to Nanda Gopal Prabhu.
Right. I'm trying to get to the point of Nanda Gopal Prabhu that that the Virat Rupa may not be as, like the Krishna's avatar is permanent in a sense. That form remains all the time, and appears all the time. It's never non-existent. Even though you said like after 125 years, the form disappeared.
So for example, the material world we know is a manifestation of the material energy, right?
Yes.
Right? Cosmic manifestation. It is, and it manifests and it unmanifests. It manifests and unmanifests, and it's cyclical, right? But the material world is not an eternal world. We know that, right? So similarly, the Virat Rupa is a temporary manifestation. It's not a form that is eternally existing. That's my understanding. Nandagopal Prabhu is saying that's not the case.
No. I'm not saying. I'm just trying. My understanding is it's just I'm not able to understand. That's why I'm asking. I'm not saying I'm dumb. I'm just trying to understand.
So my question to you is: have you found any references that say that Virat Rupa is eternally existing in Vaikuntha planets, like the form of Lord Rama or Narayana or Narasimha?
No, I so far I don't have a reference. I just went by my logical argument. If it's Krishna's form, it should be there. That's how I thought. I don't have a reference, bro.
Okay. My understanding, Prabhu, is that it manifests for the conditioned souls for a certain duration of time, and then it unmanifests, right? And
I mean, that's fine, but the question, it's a really good point you brought up. The where it began is it material or spiritual, and that's where I was just trying to understand that.
right. So it's material in the sense it's temporary, but it's spiritual because of the connection with Krishna and his internal potency. Okay. Now going back to Mataji's point, were you making a comment or were you also asking a question, Mataji?
I was also asking a question if the Virat Rupa happens in every 4 yuga cycle.
That's a good question. I have to go back and check on that. My understanding is although Krishna's appearance and his pastimes are constant and are happening in not only in this planet but in numerous other planets. My understanding is not every time it's not the same movie that's played.
Yeah, that was my question. Because sometimes it's referenced like it could be the same pastime. Yeah.
Right. I've heard that there is variegatedness in how things manifest. That's why we see often there is differences in some of the writings of the acharyas when they talk about some of these pastimes. Right? And so it's an interesting question. I don't know if every manifestation of Krishna, does he hang out with the Pandavas and does he show the Virat Rupa? I'm not sure about that. I have to check with some senior devotees on that. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. I asked out of curiosity also.
Yeah. Good question though. So I want to shift gears a little bit to focus a little bit more on, how do we meditate on this chapter, and how do we meditate on the messages in this chapter, and especially this Virat Rupa? How does it, apply for us as devotees, right? As practicing devotees. And the way I like to think about Virat Rupa is very similar to how we might think about our own body, right? Because our body is made in the image of Krishna, as the Christians would say, or as the Bible says. So I really like to simplify in my own mind how this Virat Rupa of Krishna is understood in my own life, right? So for example, I think of it just like our body. So just like our body is very complex, it's not just something that sustains our life. It is the abode of what I understand is trillions and trillions of tiny microbes, right? And in our day-to-day lives, we don't necessarily realize that. We think like, okay, it's just me, right? It's my body. I engage in eating, sleeping, and so on and so forth, and it's okay, move on to the next day. And we go about our lives that way, but we don't really necessarily realize on an ongoing basis that that our body is a board of so many other living organisms, right? And I like to sometimes think of myself as one of those tiny microbes, but in the universal form, in the Virat Rupa, right? So it's just scaled differently, right? The human body is very small compared to the Virat Rupa, but it's basically a smaller, a micro version or a nano version, if you will. So sometimes I get into this habit of, oh, I'm just like this one of these microbes in my own body as part of this Virat Rupa. What that does to me is immediately, helps you become humble. That's one thing, right? But it also helps you see Mother Nature as a person. It also helps you see God as a person, right? It's a live organism. And we're all like these tiny microbes moving about in this very complex form of the Lord. Right? So just like the microbes may travel within our own body, we travel in different ways. Right? We travel through the road, we travel through train, we travel through airplanes. But whatever it may be, we're just traveling within this very complex manifestation of Virat Rupa. Right? So sometimes I just like to close my eyes, and when it's nice and quiet, say sitting outside, in touch with nature, I just like to meditate on or reflect in this way. It really helps me. And another thing that I like to do is also, imagine, and we don't necessarily probably think about it this way because the earth seems flat to us where we are. But I like to think of, sometimes I close my eyes and I like to think of myself sitting on this earth globe, a tiny living entity sitting on the earth globe, and then kind of transport myself to, okay, if I'm now in a different planet or the sun, how would I look like from there, right? And immediately what I've seen this kind of meditation does to me is immediately I become very tiny, and helps me see things from the perspective of, not necessarily, so it helps me see things from the perspective of the other, and helps me immediately feel like, okay, I'm not the controller, right? I'm not the proprietor. There's something much bigger than us. Right? So whenever I read this chapter, it just takes me to these kinds of meditations and really helps. And I want to hear from devotees here, do you find yourself in situations like that where you're thinking that way?
But even if we go for a walk or something like that, when we see the mountains, we can see that as Krishna's thighs, in the Virat Rupa, the ocean. I mean, we can, if we actually read exactly what the Virat Rupas, depicts,
Right.
anything we see in nature, we can relate to Krishna in that sense.
Right. And that becomes immediately, yoga, right? That's connection.
Yes, that's dovetailing everything we see as Krishna. Yes.
Right. And so I want to connect this back to my original question I asked: is the Virat Rupa material or spiritual? And Prabhupada gives a very simple definition of material or spiritual, right? Anything that you see in connection with Krishna is spiritual. Anything you don't see in connection is material. It can't get simpler than this. In philosophy, it's an amazingly simple definition. And the Virat Rupa really helps us, in one sense, connect to Krishna at a very deep level. Right? It's Krishna really visualizing things in a very simple way for us, so we can relate to it. We can relate to him with something that's much more in proximity to us. Right? And I also like to think of Virat Rupa this way, because some of the things we are doing is, especially human beings living in this world, exercising too much control or exploitation of other living beings. What we can, the way we can understand this is, we are hurting Mother Nature, and we are hurting the form of this Virat Rupa, this universal form. We are going away from the natural way things should be, right? So, for example, sometimes when I go on freeways or highways and I see trees on both sides, one of the things that I pause to think about is the roads where we are driving, there were trees before. It was all forested area, most likely. And we have basically taken a razor and shaved all the forests, or increasingly so, of this Mother Earth, right? And gradually things are becoming more and more barren, right? All the greenery is disappearing. So we are doing, because of materialism, we're doing all the damage we can possibly do to the world or Mother Nature in some really horrific ways, right? And as I mentioned to the devotees on the previous Friday discussion, we've all become part of this system. We are all implicated in one way or the other. We have chosen to be part of the system in many ways. But a few individuals, and in our case especially, we are especially grateful to one individual, which is Srila Prabhupada, who basically made a different choice and said, this cannot continue. This is not sustainable. This is artificial way of living. We have to live in harmony with the universal form of the Lord. We have to live in harmony with Krishna's interest, and this has to change. And then he started a worldwide movement, and we are seeing slowly and steadily that's expanding, and hopefully puts a stop, ideally, to this kind of exploitation, but at least slow down the fever of materialism, at least challenge the pace of materialism, right? As International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So we have a big responsibility on our shoulders. to convince people that this universe is not an impersonal thing to be exploited endlessly, but it's actually the personal form of the Lord. Universe is a person, and the more we align with the laws of the universe, the more we align with Krishna's interests, the better it is for us and better it is for the living entities in general. And the more we go away from that, that's artificial way of life, and that's dangerous way of life, right? So this thing about coronavirus, for example, is just yet another example of artificial way of life introducing complexity in an otherwise naturally designed system, ecosystem, right? Just like our body, human body is designed just just to the point where it's needed to keep body and soul together, just to the point where we can be Krishna conscious. As long as we utilize our body to that extent, we are living a natural life, right? So as long as we are aligned with Krishna's laws of nature, we are living a natural life. The moment we misuse our body for something else, it's that becomes artificial way of life. The same with the universe, the same with our planet. So devotees have a lot to offer to this debate or topic of, how do we make our lives more sustainable so Mother Nature is taken care of, and in turn she is kind to us and not doesn't get angry, doesn't get upset, right? And shows her frustration and anger maybe in the forms of earthquakes and tsunamis and so on and so forth. So the more artificial our lives become, the more karmic reactions we get from Mother Nature, from the universal form. The more we respect these features of Krishna as persons, the more we can live a harmonious life. Right. So with that, I want to see if devotees have any questions or comments.
Prabhu, thank you for enlivening class, and now you just get me going. So I tried to look in the third canto, chapter 6, where you referred, and if you read a few other verses, it says that, it says in translations and purport that Virat Roop is also an expansion from Mahat Tattva. So Mahat Tattva is definitely eternally existing in spiritual world. And the second thing as well, while giving a simple definition, you said really, it was good definition. Anything you see with respect to Krishna is spiritual. So Virat Roop, from my understanding, we see in terms of Krishna, it's not us or Narendra Modi's Virat Roop, right? Just for example. So how it's not spiritual, I'm just still cannot get my head around it. So
can you hear me? What do you mean Mahat Tattva is eternal? In the spiritual world?
So it's Krishna's, it says, I can just give you what I meant by that is if it's Krishna's first expansion or the second expansion, right? So
yeah, I don't disagree with that. But,
yes,
but it's my
Mahat
point
is not spiritual. It's the first creation of the material world, right?
Yeah, maybe I'm just trying to understand. I don't know if
all the material energy is put together.
Right. it's
The
it's
primordial soup.
Yeah, unmanifested
Yeah.
Okay.
material energy.
right.
I'd like to mention something in this chapter, in text 45 in the purport. Prabhupada says this universal form is material and temporary,
Right.
as the material world is temporary. Get your head around that.
I mean, that's where no Prabhu also said that same thing. He quoted Srila Prabhupada, and I was just trying to understand. That's it.
I happen to have a thought, if it's okay if I say it.
Good. Yeah.
So when I think of the this form, right? So I might see all sorts of things in my day. I might see something that makes me feel filled with love, and I might see something that makes me feel concern for the safety of other devotees, or for this or that. And if I see something that makes me feel nervous in my day, and suddenly I see, as you've described, that I am the smallest little tiny cell in the totality of the body of God,
Right.
well, then suddenly I can see everything, good or bad, that comes as God moving around, making things happen. And I feel like even if I were to be in a predicament, I have gotten this peace in my heart because of his love for me. And then suddenly maybe I could see the spiritual in the material. And suddenly I've transformed some suffering into divine bliss because of my love for Krishna, this thing that can revolutionize and transform any pain into the spiritual form.
Mhm.
It's just my thinking.
No, thank you for sharing. One point to add to that is, this is one other point that comes out of this chapter, which is anything that Krishna does is good. That's the ultimate good. That's transcendental. That's the standard of morality. What the perception of bad is because we are in this bodily conception of life, right? So it appears to us that something is bad, or like some other philosophers may say, if the fact that there is evil in this world means that there is no God. But that's just a limited perspective of the materialist, right? So everything that is there is as per Krishna's plan. In that sense, it's all good. There's always a purpose. There's always a plan, right?
It's like if something was in the plan, it might seem like awful at the beginning, bitter, but then it will be honey at the end. And if I have my body in the moment of it being like honey, well, the body is material anyway. And if my soul has been thinking of Krishna through all of these different stages of his plan, then, well, everything that comes is bliss.
Right. As soon as that connection with Krishna is established, we get that clarity. That's right. And that happiness in the heart that you're referring to. But as soon as we get disconnected, immediately we start getting into this good or bad thing, right or wrong. And sometimes we even accuse Krishna of inflicting suffering upon us and the rest of the world, right? So it's interesting how the mind flips between these two states of consciousness.
But I think Krishna creates a scenario that helps the person who's the skeptic or the devotee, because there's something for everybody. There's some way that he can carry out things that appease the atheists and shelter the devotees in the transcendental bliss that he exudes from his body.
Mm-hmm. Right. But one class takes advantage of the plan, the other doesn't, unfortunately. those who are favorable to God, they take advantage of that plan, those who are pious. But those who are not, they try to make their own plans, right? And in the process, and they think that their plans will succeed, their plans will make them happy, but unfortunately, uh, they're met with, they meet Krishna in the form of death, right? And that's what we see in this text 26 and 27, right? So while everything is happening according to Krishna's plan, there is a class of people who are unable to accept that plan. And what happens to them? They have to meet Krishna in his awful form of death. Right? Prabhupada gives the example of a cat holding a mouse versus a cat holding a kitten. So the devotee feels the shelter of like a kitten would feel. But atheists like Duryodhana, for example, would feel how the mouse would feel, right, in the mouth of a cat.
I've always felt like he punishes the demons because he wants them to grow. I don't know if that was written anywhere, but I feel like God is pure love. So if he's punishing these beings, it's to help them become better, maybe in a future incarnation. Like, I'm going to catch you if you run from me, and if you run towards me, you get to come home sooner.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for reformation for them, but they may still not take full advantage of that, right? Some people reform after punishment. Some people continue to act against the laws of nature. But yeah, definitely from Krishna's side, he's offering opportunities at all times to all living entities. But he's especially kind and merciful to the devotees because they are favorable, right? So he offers them, he extends more, which is natural. Okay, good thoughts. Any other questions or comments?
Prabhuji, this is Madhav Kanta.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. So you started this lecture with a question. Virat Rupa is spiritual manifestation or material? I'm going back to that first question again.
Okay.
Even in Bhagavad Gita purport, Srila Prabhupada clarified the Virat Rupa. I think the reason is for unintelligent people, right? That's why Krishna showed that Virat Rupa. Now, for devotees who has faith in Krishna or devotees of Krishna, this question itself, if it is not answered, let's say spiritual or material, whatever be the answer, if it is not answered, what difference it would make in devotees' faith? That I'm still trying to understand. Even if that question is not there at all, there is just Krishna, devotee, and faith, and there is a Virat Rupa, yes, because I'm reading in Bhagavad Gita, that's what it happened. Virat Rupa also was shown by Krishna to Yashoda Maiya. Even as per Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also showed a Virat Rupa. So we have those occurrences. So that is what I'm trying to understand, how that is relevant for a devotee to understand the answer for that question.
So I think so my immediate thought is there is, these three stages of spiritual progression, right? So Sambandha Gyan, Abhideya Gyan, and Prayojana. what my understanding is, so Sambandha Gyan meaning understanding, having knowledge of things as they are. Abhideya Gyan is engaging in devotional service, so applying that knowledge, and then Prayojana is achieving the goal, right? So my understanding is, if the Sambandha Gyan is not clear in the life of an aspiring devotee, Abhideya Gyan, this next stage of practice, could be impacted, right? So it's very important for us to have very clear conceptions of what is the spirit soul, what is the Supreme Lord, what is the relationship between the two, right? That's Sambandha Gyan. And topics like this and the questions that was posed in the beginning basically help us get really strong in this first stage of Sambandha Gyan, right? So from that perspective, having very clear conceptions and understanding what our acharyas are trying to say through their books helps us, because then you march forward very nicely into the next stage of devotional service. And that is why we need I have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, so I'll stop in 2-3 minutes. I believe there is another meeting. So having clear conceptions of things as they are is very, very important. Now, having said that, the clear conception comes by us relying on the teachings of our acharyas as that is communicated by our spiritual masters, our senior Vaishnavas, and then it becomes really strong and really clear in our heart. Then it becomes very easy for us to practice Krishna consciousness, because the conceptions are so clear. So we're not always flip-flopping between, oh, is this right? Is that right? Maybe I need to figure that out. So now that doesn't mean that if the conceptions become clear just by your own intellectual endeavors, it's ultimately mercy. It's descending mercy. But it's important for us to not ignore some key topics like this, because it goes to the core of Lord Chaitanya's philosophy of Achintya Beda Beda. So that's why often we see in many of our explanations that we see in Srila Prabhupada's books is there's always that element of Bed, this or that. Both can be true. Don't get bogged down, right? The underlying message, because ultimately it's inconceivable. So that's where Lord Chaitanya's philosophy is very unique, because if you look at the philosophies of the previous acharyas, they all express it in very simple terms, right? So Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, Dvaita. But there is also this implicit assumption that I can explain everything by saying this or that, right? But when it comes to Lord Chaitanya's philosophy, he introduces that element of humility by using this word achintya. Says, don't think that you can identify Krishna either as impersonal or personal, Dvaita or Advaita, this or that. It's both, but it's inconceivable to the material mind. So having a very clear conception of Lord Chaitanya's philosophy is Sambandha Gyan, and it's it's very important for us to make sure that our Sambandha Gyan is very clear. And will make Lord Chaitanya very proud. Let me stop there. I don't want to, yeah, I know, but they have to prepare for the next meeting. So if it is okay, Pyariman Prabhu, I would like to stop so your next meeting is not affected.
I'd like to say something, so my next meeting will probably be affected.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I thought that was a good question about why does devotees need, I mean, but there are many different reasons we can think of.
Right.
One is, if you can think of just yourself, if you saw this universal form, what would that do to you? One of the things it would do to you is you'd be very convinced about Krishna consciousness. You would be very serious, and you would also appreciate so much more the different pastimes of Krishna with the cowherd boys, with the gopis, because he is amazingly great, but yet he plays the part of just a cowherd boy.
Right.
And the devotees who see this form, like even Arjuna, he doesn't want to see it anymore. I had enough. I just want to see you. So you even appreciate more his two-arm form or his four-arm form. So I think there's a lot of things that devotees can get to help them depending upon their particular surrender. Arjuna is a pure devotee, so he's fully surrendered. We're not. So we may see it a little differently. For us, it would make us more determined. So we can, but for Arjuna, it's like he can appreciate more, so much more, Krishna's two-arm form. Anyway, I don't want to go on.
Plus, he was more determined to fight after that too, right?
Jiva just mentioned he was more determined to fight after that.
Right.
He's probably proud of what his hero can do. Yeah?
Right. Right. No, that's nice. I think, but definitely, as you said, the question was so nice. It really got me thinking. So maybe we can discuss in the upcoming sessions as well.
Yeah, Prabhu, I'd like to continue if you don't mind. Thank you. But I'm grateful that because of you, I got to read Bhagavatam one chapter. So thank you very much.
Prabhu, thank you. Pyariman Prabhu, thank you again for the opportunity, and all the Vaishnavas. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
This was so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Ah.